Hello, my name's George English. I'm the Director of Research Through People. So people ask us to research their ancestors from many different places. So we made a whole lot of videos about certain places, certain countries, England and Scotland, and then of course certain parts of those countries. So in Scotland, one of the very distinctive areas is the Highlands and indeed Islands of Scotland to the north of the country. So we're going to look at some examples of people whose ancestors came from there. So here's a map of the Scottish Highlands and Islands. So you can see at the bottom, Glasgow and Edinburgh, the big cities. We're talking about the land to the north of that, very much the area where the mountains and lochs are. Inverness is a place that you recognise even if you're not from Britain. Certain other places, names will not be familiar perhaps if you're not from here. And you can see particularly to the west side, the islands, Lewis, Harris and so on, the Hebrides, and to the north, the Orkneys, indeed further north are the Shetlands. So did your ancestors come from one of these places? Now, of course, very distinctive characteristics of them: majestic scenery, lochs and mountains. Interesting, the mountains, so the highest Ben Nevis is just over 4,000 feet. Nothing to compare with the Himalayas or the Rockies or the Alps, but nevertheless spectacular scenery. Lovely lochs is the Scottish word for lakes. Now, very sparsely populated. These are not big cities and so on and so forth. Very spread out. Long history going back in time. The Gaels they talk about, the Celts. The Vikings came over from what we now know as Sweden and Norway. The clans, obviously a very distinctive feature of the Scottish people is the clans, different clans. Very strong in the Highlands, very often fought each other because land was so important in the past. What else are we familiar with? Whisky, of course, Scottish whisky. A lot of distilleries in different parts of the country. Munros, what do I mean by that? Well, every mountain over 3,000 feet is called a Munro, and some people have the ambition to climb every one of almost 300 Munros. Part of the history, the Highland Clearances in the 17th and 18th century, people literally cleared the people off the land to make way for sheep. Now, slight oversimplification, but a lot of people got cleared out of the Highlands, left to go to England, to America or wherever, and we quite often get people saying, will you research my British Highlands ancestors, from people who descend from those who were in a sense removed from their own country. So a very different area compared to the rest of Scotland. That will have influenced very much the lives that your ancestors had. So let's look at some examples. Here we've got the Munros. Now, there's William Munro. He's born in Fordyce in Banffshire. That's on the east side of the Highlands. His father and mother both born in Banffshire. David, he's born in Tain, a bit further north. Mum Elspeth, also in Banffshire. And then we go back, Ross and Cromarty, further north in the Highlands. So where are these places? Well, here's a map of Scotland and the Highlands, but with the clans on. You can see a lot of names you'll recognise there, Mackenzie, a lot of Macs, etc. And there are the Munros. There's the home seat, so to speak, of the Munros up just north of Inverness. Now, let's look at the Munros. So we've traced them back to Fordyce in Banffshire, there we are. Then further back to Tain, a little bit closer to the Munro, and then in fact we found Kiltearn, and there's the church at Kiltearn. Nowadays no roof, almost in ruins, but we're almost back to the Munro headquarters, so to speak, Fowlis Castle. And so we've created the connection back there. Now, very important thing with the clans, obviously some people are blood descendant of the clans, but a lot of people, in a sense, gave their loyalty to the clans in order that they got protection. They tend to call it fealtic, and very often the surname was like that. You had a fealtic surname. So we don't know at this stage whether these Munros are blood relations or just clan members. But a very distinctive feature of the Highlands. Let's look at the islands now. Now here we have the MacLeods of Lewis, island on the west side of the Highlands. Now, in this case, all the MacLeod ancestors lived in the parish of Stornoway. Here you can see these four parishes in Lewis. There's Stornoway, and the biggest town is also Stornoway. Now, in the Highlands, they spoke Gaelic as opposed to English in most cases. Long history, Christianity arrived in the 6th century. We're going back a long, long way. Almost certainly we will not be able to trace your ancestors that far back. And the number of opportunities for work, very limited. There's the sea, so a lot of people were fishermen. There were mills, a whisky distillery. But even for men, very limited opportunities and very little for women. And women, probably the best hope was to hope that they met a man of some substance who they could marry. Such a contrast with the opportunities today. Now, very distinctive part of the Highlands, but particularly islands, here, 25% of the inhabitants were MacLeods. People tend not to move very much, but particularly true of places like the islands. So very likely, much more likely, if you've got ancestors, that they've actually lived in that place for centuries, whereas in other parts, say in England and what have you, or Glasgow, Edinburgh, people are very likely to have moved there from other places. Now, the MacLeods lived in what's called a black house. Why is it called a black house? Because of the soot that coated the thick stone walls. There's just literally a house with 4 walls. There's the fire inside with the soot. We talk about environment these days and climate. Wasn't like that in the past. And every member of the family would have been expected to help run the house, work the land, and so on. Very, very focused and very limited upbringing and livelihood. Now let's take 1 or 2 people. Here's Angus MacLeod. He's born in the Ard of Tong, quite near Stornoway. Now there were 3,000 active fishermen in Lewis at the time, and he was one of them. So one day 6 of them were out in what's called the Minch, on the ship called the Boy's Delight, and it capsized in a squall, in a storm. All 6 were drowned. Wow, terrible. And here's his death record, and you can see where, sometime, and when, sometime between sunset and sunrise, where, in the Minch, between certain places, so can't be precise off the ship. And there we are, there's his parents, but there's he drowning per verdict of jury, because of course there was a court case to try and research this and find out what happened. Very tragic. Now another very interesting case here, we found this ancestor Isabella MacLeod. She was born in Tolston near Stornoway in 1837. She was reputed the oldest person in Britain when she died in 1945, 107. We found her letter from the King when she was on her 100th birthday, and there were various newspaper articles. Very good when we can find a newspaper article about your ancestors. Of course, quite a notable event here, so it wasn't just in the islands where the newspaper said it. She lived to be 107. Impressive even in these days. So let's look at the Gilchrist and Beath. So there's Catherine Beath. She's from Campbelltown in Argyllshire. That's down on the west coast of the Highlands. Dad Daniel, he's from Campbelltown. Going back in time, we can trace them all around that Campbelltown. Now, if you're a Scot, you'll know this, but if not, there's a famous song which says, Campbelltown Loch, I wish you were whiskey, I would drink you dry. There's an ambition for you. Anyway, Catherine marries Gillis Gilchrist from Helmsdale in Sutherland, way up in the Highlands. And daughter's born in Canada. So here's someone where Canadians, Gilchrist in Canada, got in touch, said, will you please research my Scottish ancestors for me? So we did. We looked back in time. And here's the map again. So let's look at where they were from. Well, there's Helmsdale up in the north, on the east coast there in Sutherland, and Campbelltown way down here. Now, the Highland Clearances very much happened in the Highlands, and in Helmsdale there is a statue, this emigrant statue that was built. Very evocative when you stand there and you see this. These are these people leaving their land. And certainly if you come over, you should certainly go and see the statue and maybe commemorating your ancestors making that same tragic journey. So, I hope you found them interesting, give you a bit of a flavour of different types of things that may happen. We've got all sorts of YouTube videos for you to watch about your ancestors from Scotland in general, or certain parts like the west of Scotland, Glasgow. You may have ancestors from England, of course. Surnames is a topic we find of a lot of interest. Where did my surname come from? So we made videos about that. People ask us, well, what would happen if you did research my ancestors? So we got 3 couples to sit down and talk about what they got out of having their ancestors researched. So feel free to research these videos of ours on YouTube. Thanks very much for listening. Very happy if you get in touch. We have a free consultation. Send us brief details of what you know. We'll then have a look and we'll assess what the options are and what the likelihoods of success are, and we'll get back to you and discuss the options and the associated costs. You can watch the videos, as I say, there are contact details there. You can email us on info@researchthroughpeople.com. Give us a ring. There's a mobile number for you to phone. So I hope you found that of interest. Look forward to hearing from you.